A flicker in the dust. The village of Grey Hollow was a place where hope came to die. The land was parched and cracked, its rivers long since dried up. Crops failed year after year, and the sky seemed perpetually weighed down by an iron-gray haze. The people moved like shadows through their days, their faces blank, their hearts weary. But there was one who refused to give in, Elena. Elena was not special, nor was she strong. She was not the kind of person who inspired grand speeches or led revolutions. But she had one thing that no one else in Grey Hollow dared to carry anymore, a small, stubborn belief that something better could still come. Her belief was rooted in a simple memory, a fleeting image of her mother's garden when she was a child. Before the drought came, before her mother's passing, there had been flowers of every color in their tiny yard. Roses as red as dawn, sunflowers that stretched toward the sky, and lilies as pale as moonlight. Her mother had whispered to her once, as she ran her fingers through the soil, even in the hardest earth, life finds a way. You just have to believe it's worth planting. So when the world turned to ash and despair crept into every corner of Grey Hollow, Elena clung to that memory like a lifeline. One morning, as the village slept beneath its shroud of dust, Elena slipped out of her cottage with a cracked clay pot in her hands. In it was a single seed, no bigger than a pebble, that she had found buried in her mother's belongings years ago. She didn't even know what kind of plant it would grow into, if it grew at all. But that didn't matter. She carried it to the edge of the village, where the ground was hardest and most lifeless. She knelt and began to dig. Her hands bled as she scraped away the brittle soil, her nails caked with dirt. Sweat dripped down her brow as the sun broke through the haze, a rare and searing light that made her squint. "Foolish girl," came a voice behind her. It was Merrick, the blacksmith, his face as grim and lined as the cracked earth. "No plant can grow in this wasteland. You're wasting your time." Elena paused, her fingers tightening around the seed. She looked up at him, her voice quiet but steady. "Maybe. But if I don't try, nothing will ever change." Merrick shook his head and walked away, muttering to himself. Others came and went throughout the day, some laughing at her, others scolding her for chasing childish dreams. But Elena didn't stop. When the hole was deep enough, she placed the seed inside, covering it gently with soil. From her pocket, she pulled a small glass vial filled with the last drops of water she'd been saving for weeks. She poured it over the mound, watching as the dry earth greedily absorbed the liquid. That night, as she lay in bed, she felt the sting of doubt creeping in. What if Merrick was right? What if she was only fooling herself? But then she closed her eyes and saw the colors of her mother's garden, and she whispered to herself, even the hardest earth. Days turned into weeks. Elena returned to the spot every morning, bringing whatever scraps of water she could spare. At first, there was nothing, just the same dry, unyielding dirt. People stopped mocking her, they simply ignored her, as if she were a ghost wasting away with her impossible dreams. But one morning, as the first light of dawn stretched across Grey Hollow, Elena saw it, a tiny green shoot, barely taller than her thumb, breaking through the soil. She fell to her knees, her heart racing. It was small, fragile, even, but it was alive. Word spread quickly through the village. People came to see the miracle for themselves. At first, they stayed at a distance, as if afraid that their gaze might scorch the little plant. But as days passed and the shoot grew taller, curiosity turned into something else, something Elena hadn't seen in years. Hope. One by one, the villagers began to bring their own seeds, long forgotten in drawers and cupboards. They dug beside Elena, their calloused hands working the earth as if they were waking from a long, shared nightmare. They found ways to conserve water, pooling their meager resources to keep the fragile garden alive. The first flower bloomed 3 months later, a single, golden sunflower that seemed to glow even beneath the gray sky. By then, the garden had grown into a patchwork of green, a burst of life in a barren world. And though the land beyond Grey Hollow remained dry and cracked, the people within it began to change. They smiled more. They laughed. They whispered to each other of what might come next, of how they could expand the garden, of the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, the drought might someday end. Elena never claimed credit for what happened in Grey Hollow. She didn't think of herself as a savior or a hero. She was just a girl with a seed and a stubborn belief that even the hardest earth could give way to life. And when she walked through the garden, her fingers brushing against the petals and leaves, she could almost hear her mother's voice again, soft and full of quiet pride. "You just have to believe it's worth planting."